We are live. We're going to be talking about Russia and Ukraine, what the energy situation is and how it will be impacted. And, well, to be honest, we had a couple of other topics in mind, but in light of everything that went down last night and this morning, I pretty much can guarantee that we're not going to get to anything else on this episode. So yeah, that's what we're going to be talking about on episode 334 of the In the Tank podcast. Oh. Too cheery of an intro song for a day like today. I mean, I don't know. Let's just comment for myself. Anyways, welcome to the In the Tank podcast. As always, I'm your host, Donald Kendal. Joining me today, I've got Jim Lakely, VP of the Heartland Institute. How are you, good sir?
I'm doing all right. We're preparing for a so-called snowstorm here in Chicago. So I get 2 inches. We've got so little snow this year that it's, even 2 inches is like a big deal for hardy Chicago people. But, and this is a clip I'm going to play later, John Kerry told BBC Arabic yesterday that he hopes, quote, Putin will help us with respect to what we need to do to stay on track with the climate. So there's your big takeaway, everybody, as World War III is about to break out. The adults are back in charge.
Also joining us, we have Justin Haskins, editorial director and head of the Socialism Research Center here at the Heartland Institute. How are you, good sir?
Officially, it's director of the Socialism Research Center.
Okay, you're being already muted. No, go ahead. Sorry, go ahead.
No, it's fine. I'm used to this level of disrespect. I get it at home every day, so might as well get it at the podcast as well. Yeah, no, I'm doing well. How are you guys?
Oh, fantastic. Also, Chris Talgo, senior editor at the Heartland Institute. How are you, good sir?
Doing good. I think I'm doing a little bit better than the people of Ukraine are right now, unfortunately, but I'm sure we are going to discuss this in depth for the next 58 minutes.
No, we're not. In fact, I want to talk about certificate of need laws. This is the most important policy thing that's going on in the world.
We should call in John Noderft. He's got some hot takes on certificate of need, I bet.
I'm sure.
Same ones he was making 5 years ago, but they're still hot.
We'll just replay, those videos from 5 years ago. So yeah, let me just start off this show by saying something that should probably be said at the beginning of all of our podcasts, which is nothing said on this podcast necessarily represents the views of the Heartland Institute or anything like that. This is anything that's said here is just the views of the specific person that's saying them. And as most of our listeners should know, the Heartland Institute is primarily focused on state-level public policy and domestic policy as it relates to climate change, healthcare, budget and tax issues, education, and whatever the hell Justin and I ever talk about. We usually don't foray into foreign policy, but considering that this podcast covers policy stories that are in the news, I don't think we can ignore what's going on. So yeah, as we kind of hinted, the entirety of the show is going to be dedicated to all the stuff going on in Russia and Ukraine. And we've got some energy facets to explore too, but that will be the show. So anyways, from my perspective, I'm always cautious with my predictions, generally speaking, given the option between something happening and nothing happening. I usually bet on nothing happening. So over the past several weeks, with the ramping up of like the rhetoric from President Putin in Russia, I wrote most of this off as just flexing. This is just big talk, political posturing. It's not going to lead to anything. So as you would expect, then I was pretty surprised with the news of a countrywide attack going on in Ukraine from Russia starting last night. So I also should mention, just on the onset of the show, that this is probably going to be a little bit more of just a free-flowing conversation than your general episode, mostly because we had this as just one topic of several that we were going to get into, and now this is just going to be the entire show. So, Jim, did the events of last night and this morning come as a surprise to you as it did to me?
I don't think so. I think, this was expected. I mean, let's just put it this way. Was I confident in the Biden administration and especially this president's ability to deter Vladimir Putin from making such a move, from rejecting all international norms and all of that stuff. Did I have any confidence that Biden could deter him? Of course not. It's one of the weakest presidents we've had maybe since Jimmy Carter, especially on foreign policy. It's been said, the former Secretary of State Robert Gates, one of his most famous quote, this will be maybe quoted 100 years from now, that Joe Biden has been wrong, 100% wrong on almost every important foreign policy issue for the last 40 years. It's probably 50 years to be more accurate. He was the kind of guy who would have been against Ronald Reagan's tough stance against the Soviet Union and our ramp up of nuclear weapons in order to basically bankrupt the communist nation of the Soviet Union, knowing that they could never keep up with capitalism and the wealth that is in the West. He was probably against putting missiles with our allies in Europe to deter Soviet aggression back then. Biden famously didn't want Obama to go after Osama bin Laden. He thought it was too risky. And then, of course, we have maybe the worst foreign policy debacle in the last 20 years, which was Biden's botched withdrawal from Afghanistan. Botched, by the way, just so that he could have so that he could brag about us ending the war in Afghanistan on the 20th anniversary of 9/11. So considering Biden's record, am I surprised that Putin can basically feel like he can do whatever he wants, even invading a sovereign country? No, not surprised. Horrified. I think it's terrible, obviously, as we keep seeing scenes that are coming out of Ukraine, human suffering, these missiles being sent into residential areas. It's horrific, but absolutely, completely expected by me.
How about you, Chris? Were you, if you were a betting man, would you have put money on something happening or nothing? Obviously putting your bet down before yesterday.
Well, a couple of days ago, he actually entered, what he considered the breakaway provinces in far eastern Ukraine, and Putin just declared them independent, and then he sent in Russian soldiers as so-called peacekeeping troops. So I think that this was, pretty expected, especially when you look at all the intelligence reports, satellite photos, that he was just amassing a gigantic force, along the Ukrainian border, and this was expected. I think one of the things that I'm having trouble with, processing this, is that post World War II, we have lived in a world in which nations do not, arbitrarily go in and invade other nations, especially in Europe. So this is just taking a wrecking ball to the international order that's, been more or less followed for the past 75 years. And I think it's going to be a very, very dangerous situation, from here on out.
Yeah, Justin, you pay attention to the news. How often in the past 15 years that you've been really paying attention to stuff, is there stories about, political posturing from potential military opponents and, planes flying close to other planes and stuff? And it usually never amounts to anything. Did this come as a surprise to you?
Well, I thought for sure that everything that happened was going to happen. So I was 100% right, as usual.
Oh, God.
No, I actually was not right at all. I believed, I was pretty confident that the so-called breakaway regions in eastern Ukraine, which are heavily Russian-speaking and historically, culturally Russian, were going to be consumed by the Russian forces. I absolutely believe that was inevitable. The moment that I was certain that it was going to happen was when Joe Biden, our fearless leader and truly one of the most articulate men ever to hold the highest office in this country, said that, if they want to have a minor incursion, then, whatever, we're not going to do anything about that. And as soon as he sent that signal, and that's not a direct quote, but I'm, paraphrase close enough. As soon as he sent that signal, of course they were going to take at least that part of Ukraine. Why wouldn't you? If the most powerful person in the world is telling you, well, we don't really care about that little area over there, then you're going to at least take that. And so I thought that's where it would go, and that's kind of where it would stop. What is surprising to me, and what is surprising, I think, to a lot of people, is that Vladimir Putin and the Russian forces have now broken away from their track record. In Georgia in 2008, they invaded Georgia and they took that small region of Georgia. In 2014, they invaded Crimea and they took that area. And now in this period of time, they are invading Ukraine and taking another part of Ukraine. But in all of those cases, you had Russian-speaking populations, you had a sort of an affinity for the Russian nation, wanting to be a part of it. You had rebel groups and other things. But this is the first time that we're seeing Russia now invade a population that has absolutely no interest in being part of it. And in fact, historically speaking, Ukrainians don't like the Russians at all because of the horrible abuses that occurred during the Soviet Union. So this is an incredibly aggressive move. And I think that everyone is at least a little surprised by it. So, I mean, it's, and how can you blame anyone? I mean, even the Ukrainians, there's all these videos now of the Ukrainians themselves in traffic jams in Kiev and other places trying to leave the city desperately today. And I mean, so they didn't even think that this was going to happen to them. I mean, why would they wait until today to do that, to pack up their bags and try to get out of there if they thought that this was definitely going to happen? So I think most people felt that way. Even in Ukraine, I think they felt that way.
Yeah, I know that there's a lot of, especially in the times of war and all of that, there's a lot of misinformation, so I think everything that we say should be taken with a little bit of a grain of salt, because I was on Twitter before this and I saw a map of all of the verified strikes in Ukraine, and it's not just constrained to the eastern part of the country. It's the entire map of Ukraine has verified strikes. Yeah. So
that's right. People didn't expect that, though. That's my point.
I completely agree with you. Yeah, even if I wanted to go a little bit further on, okay, if something does happen, maybe they'll just be in that eastern region. Nope, it went far beyond that. So yeah, it's pretty wild. And you're right. So Joe Biden came out, made a brief statement, one of several, I'm assuming, yesterday, and he was talking about how that the United States was going to impose a series of sanctions on Russia, and that if Russia continued to escalate, the U.S. would respond with more sanctions. And as we know, Russia escalated. So now Biden and leaders of the European Union are announcing more and more sanctions. And it's important to note that economic sanctions don't just hurt one party. They generally hurt everybody, all parties involved. And this concept was addressed during a press conference with Press Secretary Jen Psaki. I think Peter Doocy, the only one that actually ever asked hard questions, stated that gas prices in Europe are expected to rise substantially, and asked whether Americans should plan for gas price increases of their own. And to her credit, she acknowledged that Americans will likely face price increases, but that the administration will work to make sure that this pain is as little as possible. So, I think Biden had a comment that was very similar to this, that we're going to, we've got to do something, but yes, it's probably going to hurt us a little bit too. Comments on this whole concept of sanctions, Jim or Chris?
Yeah, Donnie. So Jen Psaki said that we are standing up for, our values and, democracy worldwide. And therefore, Americans should just be okay with the consequences that are going to come, especially, sky high gas prices and energy prices. But what I think, they are failing to explain is, first of all, Ukraine is not a full-fledged democracy. It's so corrupt. I mean, it's just not a democracy. So are we really standing up for democracy? And also, if we stand up for democracy all around the world, well, then what about all the nations in Africa that are not democracies? What about China? They're not a democracy. So why are we engaging, in trade and, relationships with them? So I think they are trying to take the moral high ground here and say, oh, Ukraine is this democracy that is, under Putin's, thumb here, but that's also just not really true.
Yeah, I think that this is going to be used as and I think it's already starting to be used as a explanation for the inflation and all the trouble.
Oh yeah,
supply chain stuff. It's wait, didn't this just happen? And haven't we been talking about all of those things for a while? There was, I think a CBS News article that was being shared that was tweeted talking about how all the stuff happening in Ukraine and Russia explains the inflation and supply chain issues that we're seeing here in America. Like that seems insane to me, but like this is a way to deflect from the failures of domestic policy here in the United States, is to blame it on something that's going on the other side of the world.
Yeah. Well, I mean, as far as the sanctions are concerned, I mean, Bloomberg reported yesterday that the Biden administration will not impose sanctions regarding Russian oil and gas exports over fears of making inflation worse in the United States and concerns over the harm that it could do to our allies in Europe. The United States, by the way, imports Russian oil. Russian oil makes it to our shores and we consume it. It happens probably being delivered right now. So if you're going to put on sanctions on Russia and you don't sanction, or you don't, put a blockade on their oil, or if you don't go at their energy infrastructure, their energy economy, it's not going to have any effect. But yet Biden also said that there will be severe economic consequences like none he's ever seen or have been seen in the world. And that's another joke. I mean, again, if you're not going to affect the way Russia and Putin has enriched themselves for the last 30 years through their oil exports, it's not going to have any effect at all. And besides, it's a kleptocracy of oligarchs, and so Putin and his cronies are not going to feel any pain from any economic sanctions anyway. It would just be the Russian people that would be suffering the most. But this Biden administration reversed all of the pro-energy policies that Trump had implemented over his 4 years in his presidency, all of them. We were just going to put an end to it all. No more Keystone XL pipeline. By the way, the Keystone XL pipeline was going to be able to move about 830,000 barrels of oil a day into the United States. We import almost 600,000 barrels of oil a day from Russia. So just the Keystone XL pipeline, although, yes, it would not have been ready by now. These policies matter over the long term. You have to be able to, we basically threw away energy independence. And the fact that we're trying to punish Russia while buying their oil still is just insanity. I sure am happy that the adults are back in charge with all of these great policies that have such great positive effects on the world stage.
Yeah, it's
not to mention the fact that the rising oil price is also playing right to Putin's hands.
Oh, sure. Yeah. So Biden is now, like Jim said, is going to announce some severe sanctions today. Apparently the other ones weren't severe. Leaders in the European Union have also stated that they're going to announce severe sanctions soon. There's a Reuters article that everything we talk about is in the show notes. A Reuters article that I have here that says European Union leaders will impose new sanctions on Russia, freezing its assets, halting its banks' access to European financial markets, and targeting Kremlin interests over its invasion of the Ukraine, senior officials said on Thursday. Justin, I mean, it seems like there's been nothing but talk of sanctions. Do you think that it'll move the needle at all?
Well, if they don't work, we can always just issue more sanctions. That's the genius of it, right?
Right.
There's no end to the number of sanctions that I can come up with.
Just imagine how bad the invasion would be if we didn't have sanctions.
Yeah,
oh boy.
Can you imagine how many lives have been saved because of the sanctions? I wonder.
Right.
Look, the reality is there is no interest in the United States of America to go to war with Russia. There is no interest in Europe to go to war with Russia outside of Ukraine. And because of that, and Vladimir Putin knows it. And so in reality, when Vladimir Putin sat down and decided with his advisors and generals and other authoritarian tyrants what they were going to do in Ukraine, they built in the calculus that there was going to be really severe sanctions. The idea that they didn't know that, or that, oh my gosh, really? Sanctions? What are we going to do? Like, no, that when they amassed those troops at the border, they knew that they were going to get sanctions if they did anything with it. So This is all part of the calculus. It's all part of the decision. He knows it's coming. He knows we're not going to actually do anything about this because there is no appetite to go to war in Russia. The fact of the matter is that as difficult as it is for a lot of people to understand, because people don't pay attention to foreign policy, especially in America, the problems that led to this have been in the works for decades. And the only way to have averted this situation would have been to change policy years and years and years ago. Biden has made things worse. Lots of left-wing people in the European Union have made things worse by choosing to be dependent on Russian oil and natural gas and coal when they knew who they were dealing with when they made those decisions, which is absolutely ridiculous. Lots of really bad policy decisions have been made for decades. The only way we could have actually averted this was for a lot of different things to happen over a long period of time. And none of that occurred, including with Joe Biden, including with Barack Obama. I think Donald Trump actually did the best that he could to try to get Europe off of Russian oil and natural gas. He tried to make more deals with them. They did increase their imports of U.S. LNG, that's liquefied natural gas. But the reality is Europe didn't want to do more than what they were doing with the Trump administration, not significantly more, because they don't believe that the United States is a long-term exporter of fossil fuels, because they truly believe that there's a good chance that we're going to phase all this stuff out,
Right.
because that's what Democrats are promising to do. So why would they want to set up these arrangements with us when they know that Russia is always going to produce it forever? They're not saying that they're considering eliminating all this stuff. They don't have the Green New Deal and Bernie Sanders and people like that, and Joe Biden saying we're going to get rid of fossil fuels, but we have that here. So why would they do deals with us? And that goes back all the way to Barack Obama, policies that have been put in place for a long time. I would argue that you could say that the genesis of this whole thing was when Ukraine gave up its nuclear weapons in 1994, which was a policy supported by Bill Clinton, another Democrat president. So in my opinion, three big Democrat presidents, the last three Democrat presidents that we've had, all in some way significantly contributed to this thing happening. Bill Clinton with the nuclear weapons, Barack Obama with his failure to act on Crimea, Joe Biden on Crimea and his weakness in Afghanistan and his refusal to properly prepare for this particular situation when he saw massive amounts of soldiers, over 100,000 Russians, gathering at the borders of Ukraine, and he did nothing to avert that, nothing to try to work with NATO to stop that from happening, nothing serious anyway. They all share in the blame of that.
Yeah,
and
but
Europe deserves blame too for relying on a tyrant like Vladimir Putin to get their energy, which makes it impossible for them to stand up to him. So lots of blame to go around for all sorts of people.
a lot of
It
facts.
wasn't something we could have fixed last week.
There's a lot of facts there, but aren't all of those important facts like dwarfed by the fact that Trump said that it was a smart move by Putin the other day?
Did you say
Shouldn't we
that?
focus
That
all
was
of our
taken
shouldn't we
so out of
focus all of our
context.
attention on that? Shouldn't
That
we?
was taken so out of context. He said the way that Putin has gone about this has been smart. He was not.
See, forget all the Clinton stuff. Forget about all the policy that Justin was talking about. That's what we should focus all our
of course.
attention on. I'm sorry, I'm trying out for new CNN role
No.
now that they're
You know
firing
what?
everybody.
It's so funny that argument basically was used against Donald Trump for his entire presidency about all sorts of different people. Anytime he said anything that was even slightly positive about any action taken by a tyrannical person, that was taken as proof that Trump was also a tyrannical person.
Right.
Right.
And it's like, you can look at a horrible person like Vladimir Putin and say, you know what? He's a horrible person, but the move that he made here in with his ideology and his way of looking at the world, that makes a lot of sense, and it was predictable, and we should have done something to stop it. You can respect someone that you think is a piece of garbage. That's possible to do. And when you're acting in diplomacy, really good diplomacy, you have to respect the person on the other side of the table. You can't make deals with people simultaneously saying, you're a piece of garbage, you're the worst person on the face of the planet, but you know what? Let's come to a deal. That's not how deals are made. And yet that's seemingly is what Democrats wanted us to do. And it's precisely why Vladimir Putin, it's one of the reasons why Vladimir Putin did not make any deals with Democrats, because Democrats had been blowing them off, accusing him of Russian collusion, accusing him of stealing all of our elections, doing everything in their power to stay away from negotiating and diplomacy until Vladimir Putin had a massive army of people sitting on the border. And then they're like, okay, we're ready to talk. And Vladimir Putin said, you know what? Screw you guys. You guys are going to stop me. And I've been wanting this for a long time. I'm going for it. And he did. And now these are the repercussions. We're going to be dealing with this for years and years and years to come.
I, as the resident old man on this podcast, at the ripe old age of 51 years old, I actually do remember the Cold War. I do remember and read biographies on Ronald Reagan, in which, when he had his summit in Reykjavik with Gorbachev, the Democrats and the left and the press, and even in the 80s, that's how you repeat yourself, were convinced that Reagan was an idiot, that he didn't know what he was doing, that he walked away from Reykjavik without a deal. And so he was putting the world right on the brink of nuclear war. They probably moved the doomsday clock another couple ticks to midnight and all that nonsense that the left likes to do. And of course, Reagan turned out to be right. His position of strength, but willingness to speak to the Russians, basically man to man and kind of respect their position, brought results. And so it was just so funny. Trump is, he had mean tweets. He would say mean things about people, even Putin, and sometimes he would say not mean things about Putin on Twitter. But the media and the left in this country were just apoplectic that he would actually talk to Putin and say, yeah, I think we can make out a deal. We can work something out. I think he's a strong man and we can talk to him and all of that stuff. That's called putting yourself in a good negotiating position. As Justin just pointed out, you don't spend months and months insulting somebody and then try to work a deal out that brings peace. We did have 4 years without a single war breaking out anywhere in the world during Donald Trump, let alone one that the United States was participating in. And I think that's yet another accomplishment that history will look back on with a little bit more favoritism than our media does today. But this morning I was actually thinking about, do you remember that summit that Trump had in Helsinki with Putin? Does anyone remember that?
Vaguely, yes.
Yeah. And so he was, I keep screwing that up. Here we go. Put everybody on the screen. And so I remember the media and people on the left, they didn't trust the interpreter. They said, we need an interpreter for the interpreter to make sure we know exactly what Trump told Putin behind closed doors. And we got to make sure that he's actually saying what he's saying. I don't trust it. I mean, that's how paranoid and crazy people got. Sure. But at least he was talking to him. So we live in this crazy world in which, our media and the Democratic Party are trying to put out this idea that Joe Biden is the strong one. He's the one who could finally take a stand against Putin. And look what Putin's doing right now. And it's doing it because not just of Biden's weakness, but because of the West's weakness. As Justin said, this was a long time coming. The fact that so much of Europe is dependent on Russia for their oil and natural gas. In fact, the other really big exporter of natural gas to Europe is Ukraine. And now Putin is poised to get control of their natural gas pipelines into the rest of Europe. So this is a very serious matter. And again, I need to bring my little tiny Trump doll out here with his little punching fists. But he was the one who said, you know what? Forget Putin's natural gas. You don't need that. We'll sell you all the natural gas you need. And, he offered that deal to Germany, and Germany said, forget it. We'll keep taking it from Russia. So at least we tried to actually implement policies that were good for the United States, good for free Europe, and Trump was the one who proposed those things. If Biden wanted to actually do something productive, it would take some time, but do something productive to help alleviate and reduce the power of Russia, basically holding all of Europe hostage with their fossil fuels that they sell all of Europe, is to reverse his reversal of all of Trump's energy policies in the United States. Tell Europe, don't worry about Russia. We will bring you all the natural gas you need. And then, if you wanted to be a global leader, how about asking OPEC to increase their oil production and to send more of that into Europe to circumvent the power that Russia has over that. So because even though Russia often acts in concert with OPEC, they are not a member of OPEC. So that cartel excludes Russia from it. And so if you really want to globally isolate Russia, these are the kind of things you have to do. These are none of the things that Biden thinks is a good idea because, burning fossil fuels will kill the planet and we can't do any of that. So I guess this is yet another way in how we're all held hostage by the radical green agenda, to be honest.
Yeah. Justin, you're muted. Go ahead. Oh, no, you got to unmute yourself.
Even in the most dire of recent climate change predictions about global warming refugees, does it equal the millions of refugees that are going to happen like next week in Ukraine?
Kidding.
I wonder,
kidding.
because we've decided that we're not going to contribute to the fossil fuel crisis supposedly that's occurring with climate change. I mean, like that's the craziest thing about this is whenever people talk about climate change, even if you believe that climate change is a crisis, they ignore all the other crises that have been created as a result of their policies. How about just the fact that America, if we were to actually listen to what the left wants and adopt widespread windmills and solar panels, who are we going to be buying those solar panels and windmills from? Where are we going to be getting the rare earth minerals from? From China, who's a very close ally of Russia, and in fact just made a deal with Russia, I believe yesterday, to buy a ton of Russian, you guessed it, coal. I thought China was leading the world in renewable energy and blah, 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 and they're going to fight to save the planet. This is the most ludicrous idea of all time.
I want to get to the energy topic in a minute, but you're right. It's like global warming is like a first world problem. We only care about that when there's absolutely nothing else going on in the world. As soon as like a pandemic happens or some war breaks out or anything like that, some type of march for social justice, all of those things puts climate change on the back burner. But I do want to stick on the sanctions thing for one more minute, because all of these countries, the European Union, the United States, are all promising severe sanctions. And there is talk about this concept of SWIFT. I'm sure it stands for something, but according to this article here, SWIFT is a high security network that connects thousands of financial institutions around the world. Basically, it's a system that all of these countries use with Russia to like basically buy energy and oil and natural gas and all of that stuff. So there has been calls for, like, if you really want to hurt Russia, we got to cut them out of this SWIFT thing.
Yeah, it's called the Society for Worldwide Interbank Financial Telecommunications, basically the global banking system.
There's got to be somebody that's like in these global institutions whose only job is to come up with these acronym things. But anyways, this article says removing Russia from SWIFT would make it nearly impossible for financial institutions to send money in or out of the country, delivering a sudden shock to Russian companies and their foreign customers, especially buyers of oil and gas exports dominated in U.S. dollars. Senior Russian lawmakers have responded to the threats that we can cut Russia out of this, responded by saying that shipments of oil and gas and metals to Europe would stop if that happened. Quote, if Russia is disconnected from SWIFT, then we will not receive foreign currency, but buyers, European countries in the first place, will not receive our goods, oil, gas, metals, and other important components, said the vice speaker of Russia's upper house of parliament. SWIFT unplugged Iranian banks in 2012 after they were sanctioned by the European Union over the country's nuclear program. Iran lost almost half of its oil export revenue and 30% of foreign trade following the disconnection, according to a report. So this article that I'm referring to, or that I'm reading off of, refers to this idea of removing SWIFT or Russia off of this program as the nuclear option of sanctions. Boris Johnson is quoted in this article saying that it's a very potent weapon that could be used against Russia. But all reports so far have hinted that the European Union, the United States are like, we're not sure we're going to go that far. So right now it seems like we're in a position where it's like, yeah, we're going to go full bore on sanctions. Well, not quite full bore.
Yeah, but Donnie, that could also cause an escalation in this conflict. And I'm not gonna go back in time and say in the years leading up to Japan's intrusion in the Pacific theater, yes, some historians claim that the United States cutting off all oil exports to Japan was one of the driving reasons why they went on their attacks in the Pacific for the Philippines, and so on and so forth. But if we were to escalate and really push Russia in the corner, wouldn't that also possibly cause them to say, fuck it? Excuse me. Screw it. We are going to do whatever we have to do. So when you play the sanctions game, it can also backfire on you.
Well, there's no doubt about that, but it just kind of shows how, I don't know, like with the position, we're going to get into energy stuff, and this would be a decent enough transition to do that, where they have such a strong hand that prevents us from even doing this, which is supposedly just another sanction. Before we get into all the energy stuff, Justin, you have a comment on all this?
No. Well, I mean, it's related to the energy stuff. I mean, I think that this is the key issue. This is the reason Vladimir Putin knew he could get away with it, is because Europe is so dependent on Russia for fossil fuels, which it desperately needs in order to run its energy system, especially because windmills and solar panels and all of that stuff does not produce energy when the wind isn't blowing and the sun isn't shining. You need to have constant backup energy for that. It comes in the form of natural gas. It comes in the form of coal-fired power plants and other things. And so they absolutely have to have that. They're getting it from Russia, and there is no way for them to really stand up to Russia while they're depending on Russia. And that's the genius of what Russia did here, is they understood the situation.
Right.
They knew that Europe couldn't get involved in this because of their dependence on Russian oil and natural gas and other things. And on top of that, China we're in the same situation with China now too, where we get everything from China. We're totally dependent on China. We desperately need China. And so can we really stand up to China if it said, if for example, it, I don't know, invades Taiwan like next week? Would we be able to do anything about it? Nope.
Yeah,
We would just have to keep sending them cash in exchange for our cheap goods, because we are totally 100% dependent on them for everything from drugs to manufacturing to everything you can imagine. We are dependent on China, so they can do whatever they want.
Yeah,
China and Russia have realized that, and they are taking advantage of it.
That's a spoiler alert for next week when we cover China's invasion of Taiwan. So
No, seriously.
stay tuned for that one. Yeah. Jim, before I get into this article, I have a pretty lengthy piece that I'm going to read through a lot of it. Do you have any comments on all this sanction stuff?
No. I mean, I think Justin pretty much covered it all. I mean, the reason, Vladimir Putin doesn't make moves like this unless he knows that he has it all to his advantage. I mean, I was just thinking, Justin and I, just for the listeners, Justin and I have gotten a little bit of an argument in texting, and sometimes the tone of text is not is hard to convey, and it got a little heated. I think, Justin, you said that was the dumbest argument I've ever made, which yeah, I think that's exactly.
That doesn't sound
That's
like
quite a
It doesn't
high
sound
bar,
like you?
by the way.
that doesn't sound like me.
I don't know. We've known each other a long time. I'm quite confident I've made dumber arguments than that one that got you upset. But it's just this idea that we're, that this is. Well, basically, look, the people on the left, Democrats, if you go on Twitter, and Donnie made this point earlier in our little pre-show chat, is that all of Twitter is basically, if you're on the left or you're a Democrat, is accusing everybody who's not for basically sending troops over to defend Ukraine is a Putin puppet.
Yeah.
And then, on the other side, it's that, well, no, I'm not going to send my son or daughter over to defend a country that we have no strategic interest in and, is not invading us. And this is all crazy. And this is also not the start of World War III, that this is not Hitler taking the Sudetenland or anything like that. But what if it is? It could be, and so, does Putin really make this kind of a move? With all the sanctions that are going to come his way. This is a big deal. It could be a potentially really, really big deal. I mean, World War I started with the assassination of Archduke Ferdinand. I think was he second or third in the line of the throne to the Austro-Hungarian Empire, and then suddenly all of Europe is ablaze. You never know what can set something like this off. You just don't know. So it could be as serious as the beginning of something akin to how World War II began. We don't know. I think it's probably unlikely. But what if that were to happen? I mean, Putin doesn't make a move like this unless he knows he's going to survive all these economic sanctions and things that are going to be put in place. Again, Biden has already taken sanctions on his oil exports off the table. Boris Johnson just said, as you mentioned, that removing Russia from the global banking system is maybe a little bit too severe and strict to do. So what does that tell me that the Western powers are willing to do? It tells me they're willing to give Vladimir Putin all of the Ukraine. And it seems like, because all these really severe steps, short of war, short of sending NATO troops into Kiev, short of sending, American airplanes, from the Gulf from the Persian Gulf to bomb strategic locations in Russia, or maybe, I mean, short of that kind of escalation, it doesn't seem like the world is really willing to do anything. So Vladimir Putin did this because he knew he could get away with it. And I think the world actually sees that there's kind of a new axis of not evil, but like axis powers.
No, they're evil.
Rising right now. I know they are evil, but I just meant like not the axis of evil, North Korea, Iran, Iraq, and all that. But China and Russia are very now closely linked. Their economies are linked. They're allies now. Does the world really want to get into a shooting war in which Russia and China are military allies? Do we really want to get into a World War III like that? I don't think so. Especially when both of them are nuclear powers.
Jim, do you think that the current situation we're in could have been avoided had President Biden assured Vladimir Putin that Ukraine will never become a part of NATO?
Yeah, that's what Tulsi Gabbard said on Fox a couple of weeks ago, because NATO has no inclination to have Ukraine join it. There's been not really any serious talk about that. Justin actually corrected me in our texting argument this morning that I said, well, we have no defense agreement with the Ukraine. And he goes, yes, we do. And so I looked it up. We actually do. It's basically, training, arms, and consultation, where there's really there's certainly, it's not like NATO. We actually are contractually obligated in a treaty if Putin was to invade Spain or France or Germany. NATO, as it's a treaty. So
I just think that
it's a treaty, and we would be militarily obligated to defend those countries. Ukraine does not have that level, and so
I think NATO is just it's a sclerotic institution that doesn't even need to exist anymore, because it was set up post World War II to blunt the possible advance of the Soviet Union and the Warsaw Pact countries that were founded in after NATO was created. Here we are, 30 years after the fall of the Soviet Union, yet we are still acting like the Warsaw Pact could go and take over Western Europe, tomorrow. To me, I think part of this, part of the situation we're in is that we pushed and pushed and pushed and poked the bear. Had we just said, hey, you know what, we will never have Ukraine be a part of NATO. You have nothing to worry about. Ukraine is right on Russia's border. What if during the Soviet Union's heyday, they said, hey, Mexico, you want to join Warsaw Pact? Don't you think that the United States would have had a major problem with that? Look what happened when they tried to put missiles in Cuba. We almost went to war over that. So I do think, to some degree, I'm not like a Russian stooge here by any means, but I do think that some of this, I do think that some of this was kind of like us pushing and pushing and pushing and pushing.
It's definitely an interesting, again, foreign policy debate. We've been tiptoeing around this whole energy angle for a little bit, and I want to jump into that.
Hold on, wait one second.
I was going to say, Justin looks like he wants something to say.
1 second.
Just don't say the F word. Just
1 second. I can control myself. It's not me that can't control myself. So I'm gonna read you line for line what it says. As part of the 1994 agreement that was struck between the United States, the United Kingdom, and Russia with Ukraine over their agreement to get rid of their nuclear arsenal, which they had inherited from the Soviet Union. This is what it says. It says the Russian Federation, the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland, and the United States of America reaffirm their commitment to seek immediate United Nations Security Council action to provide assistance to Ukraine as a non-nuclear weapons state party to the Treaty on the Non-Proliferation of Nuclear Weapons if Ukraine should become a victim of an act of aggression or an object of a threat of aggression in which nuclear weapons are used. And then it goes on to explain that the same thing would happen if their territories are threatened and they're an act of aggression that would threaten their territories. So that is an agreement to defend Ukraine. And then in 2009, we reaffirmed that same agreement. And now.
So wait, so it's you give away your nukes and we'll make sure to protect you.
That's right.
Okay, so
That
just
was part
take
of
that
the
as a
agreement.
warning.
Why would you give away your nukes if no one's going to protect you?
Just
Right?
take that
That's
as a
the whole
warning
point.
that when the government says that you don't need guns, the government will protect you. Don't believe them. Okay,
Not
That's
not
the
only
takeaway.
not only that, but one of the parties who made the agreement is the one that's invading them. Because Russia was one of the ones that signed the agreement saying that we would protect you. So literally a party to the agreement assuring them nothing bad would happen is now invading them.
Right, exactly. All right, I want to talk about this energy thing. So what I have here is an article. It's from the Council on Foreign Relations, in full transparency. I have made fun of the CFR in the past, especially in that one article about how wrong they were about China not wanting to get involved in Afghanistan. But anyways, this article's got a lot of good information and not a whole lot of bad commentary. So I'm going to read through it. And it's a few paragraphs that I have here. So gentlemen, if you want to interject, feel free. It starts off. The article is Russia's energy role in Europe. What's at stake with the Ukraine crisis? It says Russia is an energy giant, the world's third largest producer of oil and the second largest producer of natural gas. By some estimates, fossil fuels account for 14% of the nation's economic output. Revenue from the sector is responsible for more than 40% of the federal budget. In recent years, Russia has used energy revenue to accumulate some $630 billion in foreign exchange reserves. In 2021, for example, the Kremlin balanced its budget with a relatively low oil price expectation of $45 per barrel. That year, prices averaged nearly $70 a barrel. I think it's north of 100 right now. This conservative fiscal approach, as economic historian Adam Tooze points out, has allowed Putin to largely insulate his government from the effects of economic sanctions imposed after Russia's 2014 annexation of Crimea. Much of Russia's energy output goes to satisfying European demand, especially natural gas sent over a network of Soviet-era pipelines crisscrossing Ukraine and other Eastern European countries. Moscow has sought to build new pipelines, including a controversial NS2, to bypass older networks. It has also approved a new gas pipeline to China, though its sales there would be a fraction of its European sales. There is mutual dependence. The Kremlin depends on revenue from Europe, while Europe depends on Russian energy. But many analysts say Europe's reliance means that imposing tougher sanctions on Russia risks putting a serious dent in energy supplies. Overall, Russia supplies about 1/3 of European natural gas consumption used for winter heating, as well as electricity generation and industrial production. The European Union also turns to Russia for more than 1/4 of its crude oil imports, the bloc's largest single energy source. Some European Union states have far more dependent than others. Portugal and Spain use little Russian energy, while Germany, the largest European economy, gets more than half of its natural gas and more than 30% of its crude oil supplies from Russia. France gets most of its electricity from nuclear power, but still relies on Russian imports to meet its fossil fuel needs. Analysts say plans in Germany and other countries to phase out nuclear and coal power could increase its dependence. So this is the kind of the context of all of this stuff going on. This kind of shines a light on these countries' really inability to put harsh sanctions on Russia, despite anything that they really want to do. Because guess what? They're dependent on that energy coming from Russia. So, this is essentially the result of the West's backwards energy policies, wanting to increasingly rely on unreliable energy, has bolstered Russia and has made Europe dependent on Russian energy. A great position for Russia and a pretty terrible position from Europe. So yeah, like I said, that's kind of the groundwork, the context for what's going on in there. And it's not great for Europe, I will say.
Well, I mean, who couldn't have seen this coming? I mean, we've talked about this on this podcast over and over and over again. That the Green New Deal, Germany getting rid of all of their nuclear power plants because a tsunami in Japan actually, damaged a 40-year-old nuclear power plant that, all things considered, actually held up pretty darn well. And so they decided to get rid of their nuclear power because of that. I mean, at least last was the excuse they used. This is, and again, as you were reading all that, Donnie, I was thinking about, all the, the times that America invaded Iraq, it's like, no war for oil. I'm still waiting for all of my collector's items, barrels of oil from Iraq that never arrived because we didn't take any of their oil. But this is war for oil in a way. It's like the war is happening because of Russian oil, and because these countries are basically held hostage to them. Again, OPEC could really lend a hand here by joining the international community and getting some goodwill, the kind of stuff that the left and our Democrats who run our foreign policy and the permanent bureaucracy that runs our foreign policy talks about all the time. You want to be a good actor in the world community. All right, OPEC, you can step up and help out. And again, the United States could also do this. We were in position to do this. We were actually doing this during the last presidency, and now we've given all that up. And this is the kind of stuff that happens.
I'll open it up for more general comments here, but I got one more piece to read off for this on this energy topic. This is a Washington Post piece. It's titled "EU will unveil a strategy to break free from Russian gas after decades of dependence." Hallelujah. Okay, maybe we got some solutions here where we're not going to be, dependent on Russia, Europe, right? So let's read through this article. Oh, goodness gracious, we got some people that are thinking through these problems. For years, Europe's dependence on Russian energy has held it back from taking a powerful action against Kremlin mischief. But now a Russian-Ukraine crisis is forcing a change unlike any before, driving the European Union to make plans for a permanent, far-reaching break from Russian oil and gas, European policymakers said. The strategy to split from Russian energy, expected to be announced by the European Commission next week, would give Europe a freer political hand against Russia than it has had in the past. It would take years and come at a hefty bill for European taxpayers, but it comes with a crucial backing of Germany, a nation so entangled with Russia that one of its former chancellors is the chairman of Rosneft, Russia's biggest oil company. And the European Commission's planned strategy next week aims to accelerate the transition to renewable energy so that Europe never again is dependent on the Kremlin to keep households warm and factories humming. And before you ask, no, this is not a joke.
Yeah,
that's their plan.
Their plan.
Their plan.
More windmills and solar panels.
Double down on the policies that got us in this position in the first place.
When is that not the plan? That's always the plan. If I don't need to read anything. All I need to know is if we're talking about energy or the environment or foreign policy or refugees or the winter storm that just hit, the solution is always to every problem. Build more windmills and solar panels and do it right away. That's always the solution. So let's get this straight though, because people need to understand this. Do these countries have the mines to mine the renewable, the resources that they need to build the renewable energy facilities? No. Do they have the factories or the cheap labor? No, they don't have that either. Okay, so they're not doing it themselves. They're getting it from somewhere, right? Where are they getting it, I wonder? Where do they get it? Well, the same place they get everything else, right? Why wouldn't you go to the same place you get everything else? They go to China for that. China's the one with the rare earth minerals. They're the ones that control in fact, many of the rare earth minerals, they don't even mine out of the ground, but they refine them. So they control 85% of that market around the world. They're the ones building the solar panels. They're the ones often building the various components and technology and the microchips and all the stuff that goes into this. So what they're saying is we don't want to be reliant or dependent on Russia anymore. So instead, we're going to go to their even more powerful, even scarier ally, and we'll become dependent on them for all of our energy instead. Except now, not only are we instead of being, pumping oil, getting oil shipped to us or through some sort of a pipeline, we're going to let them design the technology, design the components, including the computers in these components. And hopefully they just don't hack us someday and shut the whole thing down. Hopefully they just continue to provide us with these parts that break down constantly all the time. And I'm sure everything will be totally fine. By the way, where does China get their energy? Well, as we pointed out earlier, they're getting their energy from Russian coal. So unbelievably, the energy that's being used to build the renewable energy is coal. That comes from Russia. So we're going to punish Russia by not buying their coal and instead buying the solar panels made with coal energy from China. That's the plan. It's just so perfect.
Yeah, it's
also
also
perfect.
It's also perfect because it's like it says that it's going to take a while and it's going to cost a lot. So it's like we're going to get all this up and running in like, I don't know, 15 years, and then Russia, you better watch out.
Let's just, let's just cut out the middleman and go back to the original plan and just buy the coal straight from Russia. Why don't we just do that? Why are we doing this ridiculous thing? I mean, it's absolutely incredible.
It really is.
To save the planet, Justin. To save the planet.
To save the planet. How? It's either I'm buying the coal and I'm running it off of coal, or I'm buying the solar panel that was made with coal. But it's like one way or the other. Coal's being burned in order for this to happen. These people are either the dumbest people on the face of the planet, or they are so corrupt and so dysfunctionally corrupt that they just don't care at all about any of the things that they say they care about. They don't care about the planet. They don't care about security. They don't care about regular people. They don't care about affordable energy. They don't care about any of that crap. What they care about is enriching themselves, making themselves more powerful, political posturing, winning elections. I'll leave it up to the audience to decide which one they think it is, but I have a strong inclination that it's that they're a bunch of corrupt, horrible, terrible, selfish people, and it's been that way for a long time, and that's why none of these systems work the way they promise after decades and decades and decades of trying.
Yeah. Jim, you've been itching to play your favorite politician, bureaucrat, whatever you call them nowadays. This is set it up. What do we got? We got John Kerry here on screen, who's looking older than ever.
Yeah, we got John,
but
Kerry.
Younger than Joe Biden.
That's true. Yeah, we got John Kerry here. Now this is as Russia was starting their invasion of Ukraine. So this was last night on BBC Arabic, and you may think,
BBC.
Oh yeah, that's the best one. They're much better than BBC Espanol. So. I don't know. So
let's go. Come on. We got 4 minutes.
So we got 4 minutes. So anyway, this is what's really important. This shows us how serious this all is, because the adults are in charge. Because it doesn't matter how many Ukrainians may die over the next several weeks. It's as long as we get the Green New Deal passed and global agreements on climate, that's all that really matters.
I'm concerned about Ukraine because of the people of Ukraine and because of the principles that are at risk in terms of international law. And trying to change boundaries of international law by force.
It's gross.
I thought we lived in a world that had said no to that kind of activity. And I hope diplomacy will win. But massive emissions consequences to the war. But equally importantly, you're going to lose people's focus. You're going to lose certainly big country attention because they will be diverted. And I think it could have.
You got to get your priorities straight.
So, right. I think hopefully President Putin would realize that in the northern part of his country, they used to live on 66% of a nation that was over frozen land. Now it's thawing.
He doesn't care.
Is at risk.
He doesn't
care. People
of
Russia are at risk. And so I hope President Putin will help us to stay on track with respect to what we need to do for the climate.
So there you have it.
You want what Putin should do? He should say, like, John Kerry, I heard what you just said. I will definitely make sure that we transition to all renewable energy. Let me have Ukraine.
Yeah.
Well, yeah.
He should say that's the reason he invaded Ukraine.
We got to sacrifice Ukraine to save the world from climate change.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, I mean, you don't get more global elite than John Kerry, right?
No.
And so this actually is a very disgusting window into their mindset. He doesn't give. All right, we've already had the F-bomb. He doesn't give two shits about the people of Ukraine. That was kind of like he just passed that off. I hope diplomacy wins, but what really matters, and it's really in the best interest of Vladimir Putin to get on with the Green New Deal program, to get on with the global green initiatives. Because the tundra is melting in Siberia, and that's in his interest to make sure that doesn't happen. That is the coldest thing I've heard yet said about this war in Ukraine, because that's all that really matters to these people is the green agenda. They don't care about actual people.
Yeah, but this is the same guy who, not that long ago, I think was it in Glasgow, Donnie? You remember this, right? In Glasgow, when they asked him about the Uyghurs, the Uyghur slave camps, and he was basically
whoa!
like,
I'm not the genocide czar. You're gonna have to ask somebody else. I'm just the
yeah,
climate czar.
I'm the climate czar. I'm not the human rights czar or whatever he said. It was basically that. I mean, we could pull up the quote. It was that. That was the quote. It was something very close to that. So I mean, am I shocked that he's now looking at this and he's saying, "Oh my God, this is a disaster." Why? Because it's going to draw attention away from climate change. That's
Right.
where your concern is. Well, if I asked, if the reporter had any brains at all and asked a question like, "How can you say something like that at a time when a country is being invaded by another country?" I'm sure he would say, "Whoa. I'm not the invading country czar. I'm the climate czar." So
Right.
I'm focused on that always, all the time. I got to be focused on that. And if Vladimir Putin only could realize that the snows in northern Russia are melting, maybe he would stop and change his mind. I have news for you.
Maybe his heart would grow 3 sizes that day.
I have news for you. Has anyone seen? Does anyone know? What do we know about northern Russia? It sounds horrible. If there was melting snow,
in the gulags, right?
If there was melting snow in northern Russia, wouldn't that make it a better place? I don't know. I don't think that talking about Siberia having less snow is going to be a very persuasive argument to the Russian people about why they should be really concerned about climate change and not invade another nation. Also, part of the reason he's invading this nation is so that he can pump more fossil fuels into Europe. So the idea that he's concerned about climate change, and if only we could just get the right climate change argument to Putin, then he'll see the error of his ways. No, he won't, because it's the next KGB authoritarian thug that doesn't care about snowfall levels in Siberia. He cares about taking over nations and expanding the whole concept of this great Russian empire that he was really sad fell apart when he was in the KGB. I mean, that's what this is all about. John Kerry is a moron. He is a moron. And the fact that this guy was almost president of the United States is unbelievable that he was ever chosen, because not only is he a moron, he's aggressively boring. Right. And yet somehow this guy almost became president. What is wrong with this world that we live in? It is seriously, it's shocking how horrible things are. It really is.
Is it possible that Neville Chamberlain has been reincarnated as John Kerry?
I think that is Neville Chamberlain. Actually,
is that possible?
I think it is him. He's 130 years old and he changed his name to John Kerry.
Sorry. All right, we're already long here. I will say that if you want to make sure that you catch every episode of this, if you're an audio listener, nothing has changed over the last couple of weeks. But for those video listeners, you might have to start finding us in a different spot, because our content is under attack by YouTube. So we have created our own channel for this podcast, the In the Tank podcast channel on YouTube. You can go and find that there. If that gets canceled, then whatever, we miss out on a couple of subscribers, but make it more subscribers by going to there and making sure to hit that subscribe button. If you, again, for those audio listeners that are listening to this on a Friday, you can join us a day early on Thursday by watching our Rumble feed or our YouTube feed. You can join in the conversation, leave a comment or question. We'll maybe throw it up on the screen or address it on the fly. If you'd like, you can follow us on Twitter at In the Tank Pod. In the Tank Pod, I think it's called.
Yep.
But Twitter's terrible, so don't go on there. And if you have any comments, suggestions, or questions for the show, feel free to email us at inthetankpodcast@gmail.com. Jim Lakely, where can the fine people find you?
You can find me at Jay Lakely on Twitter, at Heartland Inst on Twitter, and always visit heartland.org.
Fantastic. And Justin Haskins, same question.
At Justin T. Haskins on Facebook, socials, Twitter, Getter, Parler, and all the other obscure social media websites that most people don't know anything about.
That's right. And
that's where I live.
That's true. In obscurity. Chris, you are a ghost on social media, but you have made a habit of making sure that people head over to stoppingsocialism.com. So I'm going to steal your thunder and pitch that for you right now.
Absolutely.
But I will ask you to just join me in saying goodbye to the fine people.
Bye, everybody. We will see you next week.
God willing.
God willing as well.
Thank you all for tuning in. We will talk to you next week.